Welcome back to another special off-season edition of the House of Hoosier podcast. It's been a while. I think it's been since right up to the last week of the season before the postseason for Indiana. But obviously, a lot has happened, so I think it's pretty important to just touch base on everything that's gone on with the transfer portal, with some open recruitment schedule or Big Ten matchups got announced the other day. So it's something else to look into and just kind of take a dive into where we're at right now. Uh, Teams in a lot of top 15, top 20s, and a lot of way too early top 25 rankings. So I definitely think that's something to talk about. As always, I'm Ben Haller alongside Austin Platt. Both of us are now home for the semester. Classes just got out just a couple of days ago. So, Austin, pretty successful first month of the offseason, I'd say, for Indiana.
Yeah, Ben, I'm a little under the weather right now, but I'm surely not sick of the news I've been seeing regarding IU. This we knew it had to be a big off season for Woodson and company, and they've done just that. They've for the most part hit the nail right on the head. The best off season in the transfer portal, and hey, got to give credit to the fans. Obviously, NIL had a big part to do with this. Obviously, having a great fan base helps, but Woodson did the job. He knew he was under a little bit of pressure considering what happened at the end of last season. But so far, so good. I really like what I'm seeing. A little bit skeptical of the shooting, but we know Woodson wants to play big guys down low, and he got the big one in Ballo. But other than that, things look good, and the expectations, I think, should be the same around there for what they were 2 years ago in Tracer's final year.
Yeah, the Pac-12, obviously, this was the last year of the Pac-12, and it seems like they just sent all their basketball players to Indiana's roster. Omar Ballo from Arizona, Miles Rice from Washington State, Cannon Carlisle from Stanford. Three guys that it felt like going into the offseason, it's like, all right, if you get one or two of those, you feel like you're in pretty good shape. But I do think the last bit, that last push was just the NIL that really helped Indiana get all three of those guys. Got to give credit to Mike Woodson, too. Um, it's kind of an argument, not really an argument, like a fun argument I had with somebody else is like, how much did Liam McNeely's decommitment have to play in this? Obviously, if Liam McNeely's still here, there's still a lot of spots to fill on this Indiana roster. But then you kind of mentioned it. It lit a fire under Mike Woodson also to say hey, you don't know how secure your job is. So you wonder how big of a role that played. Obviously, getting Bryson Tucker once his recruitment opened back up as well, five-star going into next year was pretty big. Which of these guys are you most excited about?
There's a lot. Some people say Tucker might end up being one of the best players on this Indiana team. The exciting thing, I think, just in general, I'll get to a player, but how young this group of guys is for the most part. I mean, all but one or two, I think, have more than 1 year available. Obviously, Carlisle and Rice, the two guys that came over from the now non-existent Pac-12, are big because they're underclassmen and they have room to grow. Under a few years with Mike Woodson. But I think that the one player in particular I'm really excited for is Luke Goody. I'm excited to see what he can do at Indiana. Seeing what he's done with Illinois, shoots the lights out of the ball. Defense has been a little bit of question mark, but the spark he could provide, he might be off the bench. I think is one of the crazier things. And I know the lack of shooting that Indiana truly has, but look at the guys who are coming back. And Baco's got to have another big year, but right behind him, Luke Goody, someone I'm really excited for. Such a lovable guy with the Illinois fan base, and I'm hoping to see him improve defensively and make some shots for IU as well. That's the main three-point shooter. Indiana was desperate for one. That was kind of the last missing piece to really cement Indiana as a top 25, top 15 team when the first AP rankings come out, September, October, whenever that is. But that was the missing piece, I think, and it was good to see. Obviously, Illinois had brought in another coach, so some guys transferred, and we thought Goody might be on the way out. And obviously, being from Indiana, that was a big get, Fort Wayne native. So he was the guy I'm really excited for. Excited to see him in the cream and crimson.
Oh yeah, it's really a good problem to have for Indiana, I think, right now when you look at I mean, it's really early to have this conversation, but I think it's important when you're analyzing the kind of talent that Indiana's got and just there are 7 or 8 guys at least that you feel like are starting caliber players on Big Ten teams, and it really gives you the flexibility to play any way you want to in terms of how many bigs you want in the lineup, how many shooters you want in the lineup. It's tough to move somebody like Trey Galloway or Malik Renew out of the starting lineup, and that's going to be something interesting that plays into what happens. Obviously, I think right now the way it plays out, I think Ballo and Renew have to start. I think those are two of your better players, if not your two best players on the floor. But I think the way their minutes get split up is not always going to be both of them getting a ton of minutes on the floor just because the other one's there.
This is actually one of the biggest concerns I have. I think the shooting will find its way. I know Rice had a rough end to his freshman year, obviously Pac-12 freshman of the year, but he shot the ball well. The biggest thing that really concerns me is just the spacing down low. And Khalil Ware, obviously as big as he wasn't necessarily a big threat to post someone up. Obviously, he's on the thinner side, was a great shot blocker, was great on the defensive end, but offensively wouldn't necessarily be someone that would kind of have the back to the basket. Someone like Ballo, but that's the biggest concern. I really want to see Woodson split up the minutes, not 50-50. I do not want to see these guys on the floor for any more than 10 minutes together. And that's what we saw a lot last year with Ware and Renew. Renew is someone who's not going to take up a ton of space, but Bala really does. And if you really want to clog it down low, it's going to create a problem for Indiana and their spacing. I know people have been calling for Mbaka to play the four and be a true stretch four, knowing his 3-point potential. But I really need to see those guys. I don't want to see them on the floor for any more than 10 minutes together at a time. Mike Woodson really has to figure it out how to split these guys up and kind of divvy up the minutes, because you do not want Malik Renew to be in foul trouble as much as he was last year.
Yeah, it's what non-conference is for too. I think, I mean, you don't have to have that figured out right now is one of the biggest things. And I think the thing that plays a factor into that is in college basketball as a whole, not just with Indiana. You can't promise what it's going to look like for Indiana, but I think in college basketball as a whole, we're going to see a more boring non-conference slate just because of the way the selections happened and everything last year. The emphasis on margin of victory. I think you'll see a lot of teams schedule a lot easier and a lot worse teams in the non-conference. Not sure if Indiana follows suit, but I think it's definitely something to look at and something that may happen. So I think you have that kind of time to figure it out, figure out exactly what you want, and just have that kind of flexibility to have different lineups. You want more shooters on the floor. You're playing a team that has a couple of bigs that you don't feel like you can handle defensively. What also it does is I know when you're in May right now and the season starts in November, you don't want to start talking about injuries, but if they're kind of inevitable, at least a little bit at some point in the college basketball season. That's the most exciting thing for me is that if this Indiana team lands a key injury, the season's not over. We've seen it in the past how much injuries really have hurt this Indiana team. Xavier Johnson going down last year. And even you look at short spurts of injuries from Mackenzie Mbach or from Malik Renew and Khalil Ware at certain points in the season really hurt the kind of momentum that Indiana team had. Next year, they're much better set up for that.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things is that the difference between the bench and the starters and the talent that there is. And Woodson said 2 years ago, I can play 10 guys at one point, and it never happened that way. But he's going to be a lot less reluctant this upcoming year, to go to the bench. And I think Luke Goody is going to be a sixth man. Trey Galloway is probably not going to start. I think that's something Indiana realized, that, hey, Galloway did not shoot the ball very well this year, had a rather underwhelming year. I know the assists really caught on at the end of last year, which really propelled Indiana as a team during that 4-game winning streak, really 5 if you include the win over Penn State in the Big Ten tournament. But not having him start, I think, is a big difference. The spurt he can provide off the bench, and I just overall think that this could be an 8 to 9 a deep type of team. Whereas last year, if you saw Peyton Sparks or Caleb Banks, CJ Gunn, the 3 guys that transferred, if they came into the game, you said, "Oh boy, what are these minutes going to look like for the team, and kind of what's the plus minus going to look like for them?" But I think the difference between the bench and the starters and the gap is not as big, and that's very, very important, especially if Renew gets in foul trouble. We know Ballo's not a great free throw shooter. What happens to him at the end of games in a close game where you need free throws? I'm going to disagree with you on the strength of schedule and the non-conference. Rutgers got screwed 2 years ago because they did not have a good enough non-conference schedule. And in Indiana, 2 years, now 3 seasons ago, they barely got in because they had a weak non-conference schedule. So the margin of victory, whether what that is, the net, whatever, screw that. The numbers will tell you one thing, but I just think that Indiana should schedule stronger. I mean, the non-conference this past year wasn't terrible. It was better than it was in years past, but you're winning by 5 points or whatever it was against Army. You're barely beating Florida Gulf Coast with their best player. We went on this tangent a long time ago, but I just think Indiana doesn't have to have necessarily a weak non-conference schedule. Just win the games you should by double digits and be competitive at least against the top teams. That was the 2 biggest things that really cost Indiana a shot of not having to win the Big Ten tournament and still make the big dance.
I think it's hard because I think year by year it just changes so much what the committee wants to see, and they'll be the first ones to tell you that. It's not consistent what they're looking for each and every year. Whether you think it should or it shouldn't, but if you listen to what they used and what their biggest things were when evaluating teams close to the bubble, it feels like those answers always change. But I think to your point, if you want some confidence, if you're an Indiana fan, I think what NIL is doing right now is I think it's expanding the talent gap a little bit between some of those Power Six teams and some of those mid majors. So you'd like to hope that those games get a little uh, more blowouts. I think you'll see in those kind of games. As we've heard everywhere on social media, especially if you look at Adam Howard, who part of that Indiana program that loves to use that Twitter. They keep saying they're not done yet, and obviously this Indiana team has two scholarship spots left. They've gotten pretty heavy backcourt wise in the transfer portal. What are you looking for to add in those last two spots for Indiana?
In all likelihood, it's probably another big man. I like to see a backup big, kind of who's that third guy. Obviously Indiana had Peyton Sparks to be that third big behind Renew and Ware. I just don't see that right now with this team. We mentioned the free throws with Ballo. At times, he'll probably have spurts where he looks lost on the floor. I think Balo, and obviously we know Renew in the foul trouble. So I need another center, another backup, just a third guy to provide some minutes and a little bit more than what Peyton Sparks did last year. Other than that, I don't necessarily know what Indiana needs. I don't think they need another wing, kind of a shooter, because I think M'Baku is going to play the three this upcoming year. I don't see Woodson changing things up too much. He'll play a little bit more minutes at the four, I think, just by the way Balo and Renew will work off of each other. I don't think those two will be on the floor at all times. So M'Baku will move a little bit to the floor, but maybe just another wing and D kind of guy. But other than that, I think just a center is the only box Indiana truly needs to check to feel pretty good about this upcoming year.
Yeah, I think it just depends on how they're going to play, and I think that's something you don't have to have it all figured out right now, but you have to have somewhat sense of an identity into to how many bigs you're going to play and that sort of stuff. If they plan on playing Renew and Ballo on the floor at the same time, a decent amount, I think these last two spots have to be the big men, right? Because there really aren't a whole lot of options outside of those two on this Indiana bench right now. I know they're looking into the Monmouth guy whose name everybody couldn't pronounce earlier, but it doesn't sound like that's gaining a ton of traction. There was another one earlier today, I think from Bellarmine, who's 12 and 10 maybe, but it could also knock down the three-pointer. I wouldn't hate that, but I definitely do think those last two spots go to big men. So you think Mbako's going to play more of the three, but you said you would have liked to not see Ballo and Renew on the floor a ton together. So do you kind of is that what you're expecting Woodson to do?
Yeah, I'm expecting Woodson. He was never going to change things up. I don't think as much as disappointing as last year was, but he was right. When they were at the best, Ware and Renew were both on the floor. Whether you like it or not, that's the 1980 style of basketball that nobody likes in the year 2023, 24. It worked, and you can hate a coach, you can not like the way he coaches, but the style at its best works. And it's been, Indiana, the top half of the Big Ten in its first 2 years. Last year, it was never there. You mentioned the injuries kind of played a part. That this team, I don't think, really gelled until the last part of the season. But they cared a lot about winning, which was maybe different than prior years under prior head coaches. But the two of them are probably gonna play together a lot, and it's just the two bigs, the defensive style that Woodson wants to play. He doesn't believe in the 3-point line as much as really anyone else in the country, and the stats from that proved that last year. Indiana, God, it was awful. They barely took threes. They barely made threes. The numbers weren't just there, but it's not going to change. Not all of it's going to change. I think bring someone like Goody off the bench would help with 3-point shooting. Galloway, I think, needs to improve a little bit. He'd be someone good off the bench. We haven't talked about Ja'Kai Newton. Kind of what does he look like? Just the depth of this Indiana team, I think, is something that's just going to be so exciting regarding next year. But the shooting won't necessarily be there. But yeah, those two bigs are going to play together quite a bit. They should work well off of each other. It's just, can Renew stay out of foul trouble? That's the biggest thing, I think, that prevents him from becoming a true star in this league. And he took a huge jump from year one to year two, don't get me wrong, but still a lot of room for him to improve.
The best month of the year is here, which is why you need to know that we are partnered with BetMGM. We'll be using BetMGM lines for making all of our picks and predictions, and we'll have special offers for the listeners and the viewers of the Field of 68. If you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, you can use bonus code FIELD and you will get up to a $1,500 first bet offer on your first wager with BetMGM. Here's the best part. All you need to do is deposit and bet $10 of your hard-earned money to get it. This is what you have to do to make it work. Download the BetMGM app and sign up using that bonus code FIELD. Deposit at least $10 and place your first wager on any game. You'll get up to $1,500 in bonus bets if your bet loses. Just make sure you use that bonus code FIELD when you sign up. Most importantly, we have some fun stuff coming up for the rest of the NCAA tournament. Bet insurance tokens, college hoops odds boost, and the thing that I love the most, a nice little parlay boost, as well as a ridiculous array of prop bets for anything that you could possibly imagine betting on. From odds on getting to the Final Four to national championship futures, I'm calling it right now. BetMGM is the king of the prop bet. So go download the BetMGM app. Use that code FIELD and sign up today. And while I've got you, a quick request. The best way to support the Field of 68 content you get for free is to engage with us. Rate and review the pod in any podcast app. Like and share the YouTube videos that you enjoy. Tell your friends about us. It all helps in a world where the algorithm is king. And now, back to the show.
Yeah, Renews had a lot of trouble with that foul trouble. And also, Omar Ballo is just not a guy he's not one of those big guys who's playing 38, 39 minutes a game. He just doesn't have that kind of stamina, as you're going to see from a lot of bigger centers like him. So it's going to be interesting. I do think they need more depth. I think they need to spend those last two scholarship spots on big guys. And I think you're right about one thing in that last year, their best lineups were with Ware and Renew on the floor, but I think it was by default a little bit just because of the backcourt and how just kind of it was, and needing Gabe Cupps in reliable minutes, needing CJ Gunn sometimes in depth moments, not having Xavier Johnson for a majority of the year. So I'm interested to see how these guards kind of play together. There have been criticisms. You talked about it really early, touched on it slightly, just about not a ton of shooting on this team still, other than Luke Goody. Obviously, Mackenzie Mbako showed his capability from beyond the arc. Miles Rice, a 28% three-point shooter. Kaden Carlisle didn't shoot the three a ton a season ago at Stanford. Is that a concern to you right now?
I mean, I'm gonna probably still be skeptical about this team come October. So, whatever I say now probably doesn't mean anything. You got to put the work in this offseason and really figure it out. But there's gonna be concerns. But I mean, it's May and it's May 2nd, and the fact that I'm excited about an Indiana basketball season, considering where we were a month ago, Ben, where I didn't really want to, watch this team. I told myself, dang, it was football season for God's sake, and talking about Indiana football over Indiana basketball is quite a move. But no, the fact that I'm, even have anticipation for this team and the fact that this team will be in the top 25 come next year is exciting enough. And sure, there's going to be doubters, but there were 2 years ago. I was a doubter about a team that returned basically everyone from an NCAA tournament team. And still people thought they were overrated, even though they were picked first in the Big Ten. Indiana's going to be right there. And hey, even Joe Lunardi put Indiana as a 4 seed today in his way, way, way too early bracketology. So the fact that the expectations are there gives everyone maybe the anticipation and a little bit of juice to work in the offseason and figure it out. But everyone's got to improve shooting wise. Everyone's got to take a jump.
14th in John Rothstein's way too early. 14th in our own Field of 68's way too early. I think it's 16th in ESPN, 18th in Fox Sports, I think, by Fana. I mean, just shows you how many people and how consensus it is that this Indiana team has enough talent to really do it, to really have a successful season to come into the year as a top 25 team. I think my skepticism comes a little bit from the fact that who's the coach right now and Mike Woodson. Don't get me wrong, give him all the credit in the world for using the NIL the right way and building up this roster to where it is. And that's half of a coach's job. And that he's done that job really, really well. At least you'd hope to so coming into the year. There's still some on the court question marks I have for this team and mostly in his coaching style, but I think that's stuff we'll see early on in the season. And that's one of the biggest things. I think we use this term a lot, but it's optimistic, but being skeptical as well. And that optimism as well, I think, is one of the biggest things. You look at the matchups this year were announced yesterday when we're filming this. Only 3 teams with 20 teams in the conference now, or 18 teams in the conference now. Only three of them you play twice. Indiana gets Ohio State home and away, Penn State home and away, and of course Purdue home and away. Did you take anything away from those matchups being announced?
A little bit weird. Cautiously optimistic is definitely the way to go about this team, and I would agree with you. Woodson is probably the biggest question regarding this team and their true ceiling. But I thought Indiana got a pretty good draw out of this. I thought for sure they'd probably throw in Illinois as a team that you play twice every year, just because of the border battle, the history between those two, the fan bases. I figured, for football, a lot of teams got two true rivalries. Obviously, Indiana has that on the football side with Purdue and Michigan State playing for two trophies there. So I thought they'd throw in Illinois for basketball, but kind of an odd two teams. But you don't have to play at Rutgers. Obviously, they have expectations coming into this year. Maybe this is the year you go in at the Kohl Center. But other than that, I thought this is a really good draw. The Bryce Jordan Center has kind of been not a fun place to play in the last few years. So we'll see how that goes. But other than that, I mean, playing at Ohio State is not bad. I'm fine playing them twice. But this schedule I thought really worked out really, really well in Indiana's favor. And it's too early to look about that. There's still things that need to be figured out with all 18 teams. But curious to see. I assume it's going to be one road trip out to the West Coast to play those two teams. But excited for UCLA to come to Bloomington and true two blue bloods going at it. But this schedule, I mean, boy, you got to be licking your chops as an Indiana fan.
Yeah, I think it would have been cool to see them stick to the rivalries a little more, and obviously they're going to play Purdue twice, but playing Illinois twice, maybe playing Michigan State twice, just with the basketball history there. But overall, I don't hate it. It's just having UCLA and USC come into Assembly Hall, especially UCLA, is just going to be really cool. And couple of cool road trips for Indiana as well, going out to Oregon, going out to Washington. I like how they set it up. I mean, you look at Washington, Oregon, and UCLA USC schedule. The three teams that they play twice is each other, and I think that's very smart. That's the way it was going to play out. So I think it's hard to take anything away from it right now. It's just more in the case of just finding something to talk about for Indiana moving forward. We talked about who you would like to see Indiana add still in the coming future. We touched on shortly the non-conference play. You disagreed with me. You think they're gonna schedule some pretty tough non-conference opponents. Don't have a ton on that right now, other than going to Atlantis. What do you kind of expect to see in the short future about their non-conference schedule?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that really helps is having true non-conference road games, and Indiana has had that in the past. Obviously, getting rid of the Big East Big Ten battle, whatever that was called. I'm
Gavin
forgetting.
game.
Yes, Gavitt Games. Thank you. That going away stinks. Obviously, the ACC challenge going away also stinks. I'm hoping there was rumors that the Big 12 and the Big 10 would be kind of putting together their own thing, but maybe that is now just a thing of the past. But I'm hoping the Big 10 pairs up with another conference to do that because those are really, really fun. I remember the Big 12, Big East partnered up, and UConn and Kansas played, and one of the best games of the regular season, at least in the non-conference part. That was an awesome game. So I'm hoping the Big Ten pairs another conference, but having the true non-conference road games really helps. That home and home with Kansas, we know Kentucky is in the horizon. We figured John Calipari was never coming to Assembly Hall. I didn't realize he would be coaching in zero of those games as the Kentucky coach, but just pair up with a few teams. I like the trip out to Auburn. I thought was a really cool thing that Indiana did, even though they got blown out playing in Atlanta. But it just kind of depends on where the recruiting zone is. I know Indiana loves kind of the southeast. They got a few guys from down there. I know Ja'Kai Newton's from around there. We know Renew and the pipeline there at Montverde. So I just want to see them schedule more home and homes with some non-conference teams. But other than that, obviously big to go to Atlantis. That's a big draw for Thanksgiving, so it's kind of an odd time to go down there. But just like give me two true non-conference road games every year, and I can be happy.
Yeah, I don't know if we'll see two. I definitely would like them to get one in, but I usually don't see teams getting two a lot unless they're in that sort of, conference pairing like the Gavitt games or the Big Ten ACC challenge that we saw go away. A lot of coaches didn't like those, and I found that a little weird. But I think I like to believe it just kind of went with what I was saying about the. I just don't think some teams are going to schedule as tough non-conference slates going into this year. Indiana not having those pairings and also not really having any home and homes right now, if I'm unless I'm forgetting one that just flew over my head. But I think it's going to be interesting. I think one of the biggest things is maybe still scheduling those tougher non-conference games, but some of the bye games where you're playing maybe low 100s, high 200s, Ken Palm or net team, maybe they're then that lower 200, high 300s just to make sure you get that extra blowout. We saw though Army was not a very high Ken Palm and net team last year. Neither was Florida Gulf Coast when all was said and done. Speaking of FGCU, Zach Anderson, another guy Indiana was looking into, committed today to George Mason. But I think with the way things have gone, Indiana fans are not too upset with losing any of those.
No, seeing him kill Indiana in that game that the Hoosiers nearly lost in that first game of the year, which should have really set off more sirens than it really did, was the other reason why I think Indiana fans were excited. Like, hey, we've already seen this guy, kill us at Assembly Hall, so why not have him on our team? But I think Indiana more than happy to have the guys that they have. And all of this obviously stemmed from Liam McNeely decommitting, and obviously he went to UConn. So, obviously good for him. All the best. Dan Hurley is going to relock and reload for next year, going for a three-peat. But Indiana has done really, really well. I mean, a month and a half ago, there was like the talk was like Gabe Cupps might even transfer from Indiana. I was like, okay, that like what are we talking about here? Like how serious truly is this? And now Indiana's in an awesome spot where they have the right guys to really compete for a Big Ten title and get close to that Final Four, which, man, it's been a long time since they've been to one. Obviously, national championship as well. But considering where the pieces are in May, you can't win a national title right now, but you can lose one, and Indiana is nowhere near that. So good for Woodson, good for the staff. They needed this. They needed to get the pressure and win the fan base back, which was important. They did just that, and here we are in the beginning of May. Excited for October. I never thought I'd be saying that a month and a half ago when Indiana was down by 20 at half to Ohio State on the road or something like that, whatever bad loss you can pick out last year. But it's in a great spot, and I'm excited to see what the non-conference holds. Obviously, these should be coming in the next month. Obviously, the bye games probably come first, and then the other ones will fall into place.
All right, couple rapid fires before we head out, and we'll definitely stay in touch and with all the non-conference stuff coming out. So this is not the end of our off-season content, but one, give me a dark horse addition to Indiana that not a lot of people are thinking about that you're excited about.
Ooh, addition that people should be excited about. I think it's Bryson Tucker. Honestly, I think he's someone who just is completely flown under the radar. I don't know, it was because just the transfers were the bigger names. But Tucker's a five-star, a wing guy, kind of that three that you're gonna see, a solid shooting guard who can get to the rack. So he's someone I think people should be excited about. And I think he's going to maybe not compete necessarily for a starting spot right off the jump, but he's going to be one of the first guys off the bench. And I think Indiana fans should really keep an eye out on Bryson Tucker to see what he does in year one. Obviously, the five-star that Indiana really needed on the recruiting trail. So give me Bryson Tucker, freshman. Give me the future potentially of Indiana basketball, and maybe a four-year guy, depending on how things pan out. Obviously, if he's not a four-year guy, then things obviously go in the right direction for him and IU. But I'll take Bryson Tucker. Indiana fans, keep an eye on him.
We'll go look Luke Goody. I think he has. I mean, definitely has the worst numbers out of the four portal editions so far for Indiana. But I think it's the style of play and the fact that he could shoot the ball really well, and that's just what Indiana has needed. Is just that knockdown shooter. I think is going to be huge. I think Indiana fans are going to absolutely love this guy. He can play pretty good defense as well. Second rapid fire I had. Give me a matchup right now, non-Purdue matchup that you saw in the Big Ten slate that you're really looking forward to, or Atlantis.
Well, I could just bail myself out here and say Atlantis, but hey, Michigan at home. How about Dusty May and the job that he has done in the portal? Michigan, obviously a big name. Juwan Howard really took that team in the wrong direction the last few years, but there was rumors that Dusty May wind up at Indiana. He's going to wind up in Bloomington, and whenever those teams meet. And Michigan, Indiana always have had good matchups in the past few years. So give me that matchup at Assembly Hall. I have that one circled. Dusty May's return to IU. Hopefully, it's a good ovation from the crowd. I doubt that they'll boo him for going to Michigan, but Dusty May's return to IU.
Yeah, I don't want to pick one, but I love the Ohio State matchups. I think are fun because Jake Diebler has done such a great job at the portal as well. I think it's two of the Big Ten teams that have done some of the best jobs in the portal, and two programs that have that basketball history that I think are finally ready to be back, not just competing for an NCAA tournament bid, but competing for the Big Ten. I think those are two teams that'll do so. Unless you have anything else, that's all we have for the first off-season edition of House of Hoosier going into next year. Should be a very exciting season next year. Should be the most exciting season that I have been here on the House of Hoosier podcast. But thanks everybody for listening. Austin, definitely feel better. Stay in touch.
Yes, sir, Ben. Go Hoosiers, man. It's an exciting time to be in the off season and an exciting time to not have to worry about school.